Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really happy to know that you're here and really glad to welcome you to this webinar. This is a webinar presented by SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative, also known as CERi for short, and it's about the relationships between community researchers and university researchers, and we have a really wonderful group of people here to speak to their experiences of both. My name is Jackie Wong, and I work with the Community Engaged Research Initiative on community projects. And I'm so happy to be facilitating this discussion. It's hosted by Nick Blomley, a geographer with SFU, and we'll hear from him very shortly. As we move into our time together, I would like to acknowledge the land that we're on. I'm calling in today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people known as Vancouver, BC. Other speakers in this webinar are joining us from the homelands of the Stalo people known as Chilliwack, BC, as well as the homelands of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Stamanis, and Stalo people known as Maple Ridge, BC. Thinking about the land and acknowledging the land in this work, the work of CERi and a huge part of where we are hoping to bring this work is through an active practice and journey of decolonization. And so at every level, we're really working to shift the balance of power in service of communities. And part of that, part of what that looks like right now is lifting up and centering Indigenous scholarship, as well as working consciously to change the terms of community engagement towards a more inclusive and liberated future. And in that spirit, I really want to start this time together in a good way and move through a few of the agreements about how we are going to be gathering in this space together. So we'll move to a new slide now about our community agreements. So you probably heard a robot voice, maybe you didn't before the webinar started, that the session is being recorded. That's because we'll be posting it on our channels online for folks who can't make it today. I know that Zoom is a ubiquitous medium at this point for many of us, but we're still getting used to it and still getting used to the realities of the pandemic. So this particular webinar is one in which you can see the speakers. You can see me right now, but audience members can't see each other. I think, especially in this context, the strangeness, we really want to gather here in a spirit of mutual respect and support for one another, really acknowledging the diverse lived experiences that we are living in and moving through, and thinking about how we can send that energy to each other in this space together. We're also here for only 60 minutes today. We're going to be out of here at 12 at the very latest. And for that reason, the big conversations that we're having are going to be maybe moved forward towards some strategies and solutions, but we might not have all of the answers. So in our discussions, we're going to be expecting and accepting non-closure in what we cover today. Since people can't necessarily see each other, but they might want to introduce themselves, you're very welcome to optionally introduce yourself if you'd like in the chat box there. I'm just pasting a prompt for how you might wish to share if you'd like to. You might see some familiar faces in the SFU community. And I wanted to just move into the next slide just to tell you a little bit about what our time together is going to look like. So the first 35 minutes of our time will be a space in which you'll be hearing from our speakers, our community researchers, as well as our SFU researchers. And during that time, if there are questions or reflections that come to you, we invite you to send your questions through the Q&A platform on Zoom. You'll see that Q&A box just on the bottom of your screen. The second, I think it's the second icon from the right next to the more button and the three dots there. Please submit your questions through the Q&A and not in the chat, as we won't be able to monitor the chat for questions. And the second half of our time together will be spent looking at the participant questions and having a more unstructured conversation. So really looking forward to this. Without further ado, I'd love to stop the slides now and welcome Nick Blomley to this space. He's going to spend a couple of minutes to introduce and focus this discussion here. We're so lucky to have Nick here with us at CERi. Hello to you in your living room. Nick is a real beloved member of the SFU community. He's a geography professor at SFU, and he's also a researcher in residence with CERi. Much of his work focuses on the oppressive effects of legal relations on marginalized and oppressed people. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Jackie. And thank you to everyone for being here today. Particular thanks to Tom and Connie and Marina and Claire for taking time to so we can learn together on this crucial topic. So community engaged research is really about trying to make research more horizontal, breaking down many of the barriers that exist between academic and community members. So if it's horizontal, it's very much about relationships, building relationships, relations of trust, relations of respect. So I'm hoping that this dialogue can really think through those relationships, think through the ways in which they often can work well, but maybe not always as well as we like. So ideally, those relationships can be a space of friendship, of solidarity, of mutual learning. But even though we're aiming for a horizontal relationship, we don't live in a horizontal society, quite clearly. So people come to those relationships from places of difference, very real differences of privilege, differences of commitment, differences sometimes of unrecognized bias, and that can manifest themselves in ways that complicate these relationships and make them work in some more problematic ways. So I'm hoping we can think this through, and I hope we can think of all this conversation also as a space of learning. We have a lot of students in the room, which is fantastic. So sharing people's experience and learning is something I'm keen to think about. We're also privileged to have community partners who are our teachers in this space in some really important ways. So I'm really excited to learn with and learn with our participants in this important dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nick. We're so excited to welcome our panel of community-based researchers to this discussion. I'll invite Connie Long and Tom deGrey to turn on their cameras now as we introduce them. Connie Long, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I saw the beautiful message that you sent to us in the chat. I am so sorry that this has happened, and I'm just wowed at your dedication and resilience in joining us in this moment, Connie. I'm going to introduce you first and have you also speak first, so that if you need to, you're welcome to zip off of this chat anytime that you need to. You don't need to stay for the whole hour if you need to take care of your kids or take care of yourself. We really just are so appreciative of you being here today. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm using the bathroom as my office, so.
That's a very real parenting thing for sure. So Connie is tuning in with us from Chilliwack right now, and Connie, I'm so glad to meet you here. Connie Long is an advocate for vulnerable communities with lived experiences, working in Chilliwack and Abbotsford. She has experience with addiction, and she's passionate about what she does. Connie, I'll ask you to respond to this question first, and then we'll go to Tom, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But I wonder if you could provide us some examples, Connie, of relationships with university researchers or university students in community research that have gone well or that have gone not so well for you, if you could describe those experiences.
These relationships are actually a huge part of my life right now. I mean, 6.5 years ago, I was still in downtown Abbotsford, living my life. I was a drug dealer, and obviously not the most ideal life, but it was somewhere that I was familiar with being. I made a choice to reach out, and I ended up in Chilliwack, where right from the very beginning, I was presented opportunities to have relationships with people who did research, like Nick. There was a research project with UBC at City Hall that I was like, well, why not? I'm going to do this, right? I want to change my life. What is it that you want me to explain? Like, if it wasn't for these relationships, actually, I wouldn't be in this position that I am now, where I have a home, where I have purpose, and where the life that I lived before is no longer something that I wear as a veil of shame. I wear it now like it's my mantle of pride because it means something. It helps create a bridge between people who are unfamiliar with the actual details of our life as people with lived experience. I think that I feel vital.
That's a huge.
The fact that there are people that care everywhere, and I think that the problem has been that nobody knows how to bridge that space between the vulnerable community and those that want to actually do something about it, those that actually want to make a change. There's a lot of stigma, and these groups like this helps eliminate stigma. And I'm all about that. I don't know what else to say, except for that I'm grateful to be here. and I feel confident that my input means something and helps others learn from and it's not just like me sharing my information and having like you people learn from it, but also when I can go somewhere and and I do speeches and stuff, and I look out in the audience and sometimes I can see people who are in that dark spot listen to what I'm saying, and you see that little spark happen. And because I have relationships with people like you guys, then I get opportunities to be able to share that with people who identify and also feel that sense of purpose, or maybe have that hope, a little bit of spark of hope.
Beautiful, Connie. Thank you so much for sharing. That sounds like such connected and transformational work that you've been part of. Really appreciate that. Connie, I'll ask you to stay on as long as you'd like to, but you are absolutely welcome to do what you need to do. I'm really happy to hear now from Tom deGrey, who is tuning in from 312 Main, down near Main and Hastings, which is where CERi is headquartered. Tom deGrey works as a tenant researcher with the Downtown Eastside SRO Collaborative, and he's also a co-researcher with the Right to Remain. He has experience with the effects of inadequate legal protection and by law enforcement on low-income tenants in his neighborhood, as well as the roles of advocates, politicians, and researchers in supporting tenants' rights. So, Tom, thinking about those experiences, I'm really curious about how the nuances in those relationships have played out for you. What are some examples of how this work can go really well, and what are some things that people should be aware of in terms of potentially some of the hazards of engaging in ways that can sometimes be harmful or unintentionally oppressive? Tom, I'm trying to unmute you. Do you mind unmuting your computer, please? I'm sorry, I think that it's still muted. Here we are. Thank you.
Third time lucky. That's a good question. It's difficult because there hasn't really been any particular problems between the relationship between the SRO Collaborative and Right to Remain, and I have my feet in both camps. The word collaborative, I think, is the best. We sometimes say partnership, but I don't think that's particularly accurate. We do collaborate. It's very organic. It's very natural. Neither group is particularly structured. So it's a lot of conversations, people getting ideas, sharing ideas, that sort of thing. And it's worked terrifically well. A concrete example, Dr. Jeff Masuda, you might know him, stumbled across an old federal program called RAP. Now, what RAP is a mechanism where the federal government could fund deeply low-income housing for repairs, and many of these places are in terrible shape. And we had been in the SRO Collaborative looking for some way of basically getting senior levels of government to fund this. And so using the RAP program as a precedent, now there were problems with that program, we would have to improve it and change it, gave us a lot of muscularity in that suggestion. So there's an example where the two halves, academic research and community-based organizing, mesh together extremely well. Now we haven't got the RAP program, it's an ongoing situation. There's a concrete example. In discussing this process we're doing right now, I was asked to find out a problem, and I've actually been scratching my head trying to think of what's wrong. Is there anything wrong? I don't feel like there's anything wrong. I think unless we get on a very subtle level, speaking of biases, people really understand what it's like to be really poor. I find no, they don't. They think they do. They're sympathetic. They may have an academic understanding, but you know what it feels like to have nothing and knowing you're never going to have anything? That tends to affect one's judgment in very, very subtle and different ways, right? And I think that's bears thinking about. I don't have a credit card or bank account. I have nothing to fall back on. If I get in trouble, I'm in big trouble. Very different psychological space. Now, I wouldn't say that's a problem, but I think that that's something that academic researchers should contemplate, frankly. And for that matter, we should contemplate what their lives are like. I don't know what it's like to be rich either, frankly. And I doubt whether I'll ever have that revelation, but I've worked quite a bit in the Vancouver archives through Right to Remain as a so-called tenant researcher. I found that a wonderful experience personally. I've always loved libraries. I think that's a super library with a very narrow focus. My task was to photograph documents. We did thousands of documents, but I was encouraged to see if anything jumped out. And it was a lot of fun and utterly fascinating. I found my own building that I live in, which is a heritage building. It's 118 years old. It's the last remaining example of a class of building in Vancouver called a cabin. There used to be 68. This is the last one. And this was the 1930s, where the health inspector was, enforcing some health bylaws in this place. But anyway, it was a real thrill to see my own place, my own building, mentioned some McLean's Park, which is right in front of me. And that really grounded the whole experience of what I'm doing right where I live. So that's kind of a more personal thing. I don't know whether it's, well, I suppose it has informed what I did in a bit. It's given me a bit of spirit. How we help the researchers is something, I guess we're content, I suppose. I don't know exactly what we're for, but they've been invaluable for what we're doing. Difficulties, we're sophisticated enough to, when we communicate with different groups, to change the way we speak, obviously. Dr. Blomley wrote a very interesting research paper directed towards the city of Vancouver, specifically the legal department, because we're trying to get something implemented by them, and the legal department seemed to be the barrier. And it was fabulously well done, Nick. It was uber academic, and even with my reading skill level, I had trouble wading through it, but it was entirely appropriate to a bunch of lawyers.
So Tom, I'm going to actually ask if there's lots of rich material here, and I think there's some pieces here that I wonder if Connie might be able to respond to very briefly, particularly if you have, and sorry, that's the voice of my kid outside in the hallway right now. It's a very high chipmunk voice. I'm curious, Connie, about, and if you're able to unmute your microphone, about if you have any experiences that you'd like to share regarding some of the lived experiences that you bring to this work, and particularly how stigma has played a role in abilities to engage or not be able to engage in this kind of work. And really curious particularly about what you think researchers need to be doing differently when they consider how to build these bridges in a good way.
What they should be doing differently. Okay, so like some of the lived experiences that I bring to the table are like the research that I did with Nick on people and basically their stuff and losing things, what our stuff means to us, to displaced population. What could they be doing differently? Is this just about research? Do you want me to talk about
how they build relationships with people, how they bring people into the research?
So far, my experience has been wonderful. It really has. Like I said, I've also done research with a few people from UBC and locally in the city. I think probably, and I understand that when you're doing research or you're leading these projects, that you have a time limit and you have, there's a lot involved in it. But I think maybe the personal relationship you could work on a little bit more. Taking the time to spend time with the individual that you're working with.
Thanks,
And
that's so helpful.
Yeah. It all seems to go so far.
I'm so glad that your experiences have been so positive. Thank you both for sharing that. I'd like to now turn to the university researchers who are here and who have done work with both Tom and Connie. One person is just in the room here with Tom right now. I'm really curious about both of your responses to what's coming up here, and also what creative possibilities might exist to strengthen the way that people are in relationship with each other, to strengthen those bridges that we're trying to build. Really pleased to introduce both of you. First, I'll introduce the new person here. Claire Shapton is a second-year master's student in SFU's geography department within the Faculty of Environment. She's interested in the intersections of housing justice, feminist ecologies, animals, and governance. Her current academic work analyzes the logics of property and multi-species housing precarity in Abbotsford, BC, with the activist group Drug War Survivors. And Marina Chávez is with Tom right now. Marina is a master's student in the Department of Geography. She's focused on understanding the law's role in the regulation and social construction of poverty, and currently she's working on a project related to the regulation of SRO tenant possessions in Vancouver's downtown east side. So welcome both of you. Claire, I'm really curious if you could speak first to some of these questions around what could be done differently, what could be done to address potentially negative relationships that could be resulting as a result of research.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for everything that's been shared so far. I've already learned a lot from this panel. I'm very glad to know that there have been so many positive experiences so far with university-based researchers. I've thought a lot about the type of systems that we're invested in as university-based researchers, and that's particularly the university knowledge production model. And something that I've thought about a lot is how you can't go into a project or a relationship knowing exactly how it's going to go or expecting to know that. I almost think of that as a form of hubris. And I was thinking about that when I heard from Connie and Tom about how it's important to really see your input in a project be reflected and see that representation, because I think that really listening to someone's knowledge and experience as a university-based researcher is just like a part of respect. And So I think that taking that time to really listen to the other researchers that you're working with, and and I'll wrap this up quickly, and not have an expectation about where that will go, with the project, how long it will take, what types of responses you're really going to receive. So being open and really respectful and curious about the knowledge that people are going to share. I think that those are all very important things.
Thanks so much, Claire. I love what you're speaking to about leaving space for the unexpected and being really open to what arises and deeply listening in a way that sometimes we're not always taught how to do. That's so important. Marina, I would love to hear your reflections on this too.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you can hear me with my mask on. I want to start by saying absolutely thank you so much to Connie and to Tom. Your reflections have been really, really meaningful and helpful for me. I think especially something that doesn't come up often is some of the really practical ways that that researchers can engage better and work better with community researchers. And some of that is stipending, right? When we stipend someone, making sure that they're able to get that money right away. Because of the way that things move typically very slow and at a glacier pace in academia, and we're also expected to have certain deadlines and certain timelines for things, it doesn't move in the same way for people with lived experience. And sometimes when you need to be paid, you need to be paid, right? And if you, or if there's something, being really mindful of what's going on in an individual's life or in the community's life, and kind of looking at it from a perspective where it's not just about the deadlines and the research that needs to get done and the priorities that you have, but really being flexible and amenable to what's happening for the individual. And I think that's particularly something that can get muddled, especially during something like the COVID-19 crisis that we have right now. It's like, there's a lot of things happening. There's isolation that can happen from not being able to meet in person. There's a lot of ways that people are trying to deal with their mental health. There's a lot of things happening there. And in trying to both slow down and then speed up to meet academic deadlines and to be a particular type of researcher, you kind of break some of that connection. And so I think that like Claire mentioned, having that flexibility, having the understanding that you're coming from a different place and prioritizing the community researchers, because ultimately you need them, right? And you don't need them just from a standpoint of research, right? You also need them as like they become your friends, they become people who are close to you, and to treat them in a way that's not respectful and not respectful to their circumstances and to their lifestyle, I think is ultimately a detriment to yourself and to the research as a whole.
Thanks so much, Marina and Claire, for sharing those reflections. That's so helpful, particularly when thinking about how to in reality move at the speed of trust and what that means in terms of working with and also through some of the academic structures that don't necessarily set us up to do that well all the time. I welcome any of your reflections that you might have in the Q&A, folks who are listening. It's a lot to take in, and I'm really curious about some of your questions. One of the first questions that's coming in from somebody is they're wondering, and I wonder if this might be perhaps best answered by Nick. Wondering if SFU has community engagement projects that are open to volunteer work from researchers who aren't affiliated with SFU. There's a lot of, I think, interest in the way that SFU does things from the community perspective, and people are curious about how to get involved.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for everyone for their comments. I'm sure there is, and I know there is folk who have volunteered and volunteered at both ends of the spectrum. So Tom's work with the SRO Collaborative, there are lots of folk who have been involved or drawn into that through their own passion for questions of housing justice and so on. And because of the kind of organic relationship between the SRO Collaborative and the Right to Remain, which is sort of the academics sort of support group, if you like, for SRO Collaborative, people can sometimes move between those two spaces. But it has to be done carefully. I mean, I often have students, for example, who say, I really want to volunteer in the downtown east side. And my first response is, well, you need to do that very, very carefully because, you know, there are problems in sort of parachuting in and expecting for that to be well received. But absolutely, I mean, I think it's a question of contacting individual faculty, but also reaching out to those organizations, on the community-based organizations.
Thanks so much. Another question that we have is a really, I think, such an important one in this work and is so central to this work right now. What are some ways that we can decolonize agenda setting, data gathering, and reporting, and in true partnership with communities so we don't fall into the trap of preying on communities, even with good intentions? Obviously, intentions aren't always matching our impacts. Also, would panelists mind sharing how they define community and what their first steps might be when they begin community-engaged processes? This is a big question, so I'm just going to include this in the chat box for the panelists so that you can look at it in writing as well. And you're welcome, folks are welcome to jump in by answering part of this or all of it. Not everybody might have all of the answers to everything here.
I'll jump in.
Oh, sorry, I'll let you go first.
To define community is a very different thing. Actually, there's probably 4 or 5 different ways of looking at community, or 6 or 7. It's economic, there's ethnic, there's the actual place you live. I mean, I know my neighbors, they're not exactly the same as I am. Fundamentally, it comes down to relationships of different kinds, right? Our community tends to avoid the idea of class. A community tends to be, if we want to use the word class, I don't really like using the word class anymore, but it tends to have a similar slice of the society that you're in. That's a nebulous answer to a difficult question. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Tom. And Claire.
I was going to speak to the community part as well, because as I was hearing, like, there are many different communities, and I think of a community as a group that has commitments to each other, and so when I think of community engaged research, I think about having a commitment to the work that is already being done, and that and in a way like being a part of that community, and that people can have expectations for you, and that you'll continue to be responsive and flexible to what those expectations are. As far as, sorry, it keeps moving, but thinking about agenda setting and data gathering and those types of things, I also saw a question about ethics that maybe we'll get to later. But I think that one concrete step is to make your methodology as flexible as possible, to have different avenues to go down if community needs change, if circumstances change, and also to be like very open about how you're making those decisions, and seeking a lot of input about how you make those decisions is very important, as opposed to having this set methodology that you go in with and follow, because that's what will get you published as quickly as possible, for example.
Any reflections from Marina?
Yeah, I've been trying to sit with this question for a little while, because and I want to say thank you to whoever brought it up, because it is definitely something that weighs on me that I think there's a lot of room for reflection for myself there. I think I agree completely with Claire on community, and I think importantly, community is also, there's a political association with it as well, and especially about those commitments. And I think in my way of kind of building that connection with community engagement, a lot of it is just sitting quietly, right? Listening, sitting with people, getting to know people. And this is like attending meetings and maybe asking some questions, or just kind of sitting and learning and listening to what people have to say. And then, you know, little social events too are ways also to connect with people, you know, maybe having a socially distanced beer in a park, you know, things like this that kind of get you to get to know one another and to build that trust. Because ultimately what you want to do is you want to not take up a lot of space, I think, and learn and listen and try to get a sense for what's happening and how you can fit into the already existing dynamics. And in terms of decolonizing, that's an excellent question. And I think that's something that, as somebody who is in academia right now and who is kind of grown up or is following this path, that's not something that I can really dictate. That's something that I can join an effort to do that as an ally and as a supporter, but it's not something that I can do myself. And so I think that's something that has to be for sure community led. And in trying to make research that way in agenda setting, it really has to be that collaborative process where you're not centering yourself as the researcher, but instead as like a facilitator or as someone who is, you know, as another part of a team. And so, I mean, that's an excellent question though, and I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time.
I suppose I could throw in a negative example that happened in the downtown east side. There was a harm reduction group for people that have serious addictions, which is an illness, of course. And they became to deeply resent the research that was studying that. There were too many of them, and they were not developed in relationships, and they were resentful. They began to say, no, you can't come in here and ask us questions. So there's an example of, I know it's a bit of hearsay, there's an example of a group of researchers who didn't do the preliminary groundwork, make the relationships, were not respectful, right? And the members of this harm reduction group felt they were being mined for information, right? And okay, thank you, see you later, I'm gonna go write my paper. You know, don't call me, I'll call you, that kind of attitude. So yeah, an initial relationship building is very important, I think, and respect all through. This is a group of people that suffer from constant disrespect, I might add. So they're extremely sensitive to how they're treated, quite understandable. So that's a negative example of doing it wrong, right? Presuming that what I hear is true.
Thank you, Tom. I want to pick up on some of that. Those are such important points. And I'm reading, Connie, your note that you've included about, you just sent a note to the panelists in the chat about tokenism and about what it means to really cultivate these two-way relationships of respect and reciprocity. I wonder, Connie, if you could expand on what that means to you in terms of how do we build this reciprocal relationship of trust and respect in a good way?
So like I'm a part of a lot of groups. I actually am the founder of a drug user group in Chilliwack. I don't facilitate there anymore, but I still attend meetings once in a while. I'm part of Drug War Survivors Abbotsford, and I do outreach and harm reduction for the Purpose Society. But I'm noticing a trend, and what seems to me that there's a lot of people like PWLs with bad behavior who come and continue to get stipends. And I understand how important stipends are for people, but maybe because I am a person with lived experience, I don't know, but I can see, I recognize certain individuals who are getting away with this horrible behavior. And as much as you can like I understand and respect the fact that people want to look at us and not tokenize us and give us opportunity. There are those on this side that who are definitely taking advantage of it. And it's not like, I don't know, it really makes me angry, but it's an issue, right? Like, in all of the groups that I go to, there are those people who are there just for the stipend who don't contribute. Trust is a two-way street, right? I've been tokenized, or not tokenized, but I've been a person who suffered from stigma. And to have an opportunity to build trust with people is something that's very, very important to me. I think it's okay to tell people to beat it, is what I'm trying to say.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Although we don't want to be tokenized, I don't feel like you guys should be taken advantage of either.
That's absolutely, I totally agree, Connie. I think that's a really great way of putting it. And I think that in the same way, you guys should also be able to tell us to beat it also, and to check us, right? Because I think that's what happens is that, like, especially coming from a place of privilege, and a lot of times, like, I mean, everyone knows that university tuition is not cheap, or, being an academic, you can, especially as like a tenured professor, you make money. And so, like, if someone is treating you, if someone's coming into the space and they're treating you with disrespect in like that two-way street, telling a researcher, telling someone like, hey, you can't talk like that, or hey, you actually don't know what you're talking about, it's actually this, is something that I want to hope that the participants and the community researchers feel comfortable saying, to like help us if we need it, because we don't know everything. Even if you have a PhD, you do. Yeah.
And I think that maybe other people with lived experience should be encouraged to tell those that are not behaving properly, because they're going to take it maybe from us better than they are from you. I don't know.
There's huge work here about how to articulate these boundaries and how to set them in the fabric of the work, and also structurally. I have a question from an audience member who's asking about how to address these items and questions on a structural level. They're asking a question for the university researchers, and they're curious about when you're seeking IRB approval, which is the Institutional Review Board's approval for community-based studies. What are some important things to include in your ethics applications to signal your commitment to a horizontal collaboration with these communities?
Maybe I should pick up that.
Yeah, Nick has a
who's filed ethics applications. So I don't. It's sometimes challenging, I think, for university ethics boards to fully understand the nature of community engaged research, because it is not orthodox research. It's not the traditional model where you go and you gather data and then you leave. There's some somewhat extractive relationship. And as a consequence, it's I think vital to work with ethics and even the personnel who administer ethics to try and explain the nature of the research relationship and the way in which it actually departs from those conventions. So rather than maybe submitting the ethics application, you need maybe something more strategic where you have a conversation with the ethics board directly, which is in fact what we've been trying to do. So there's been restrictions placed on face-to-face contact, understandably given COVID. But of course, what that means, and we discussed this in an earlier webinar, what that means is that the kind of face-to-face relationships that are so integral to community-based research, where Connie and I can sit together and have a meal and talk about our lives and so on, we're not allowed to do, or it's much more challenging to do, and so consequently, it's imperative, I think, to kind of to to talk directly to ethics folk and have them understand the different nature of the relationship that really is at the core of the conversation we're having now.
I'd also like to add that that university research ethics have a particular set of commitments, and they can be really, creating your ethics application can be a useful process for thinking about just the ethics of your research generally. It's also a project to absolve the university of some liability, and so you theoretically could have an approved ethics application which doesn't meet the standards of what a community engaged research project should be. And so just to see that as a tool, this ethics application exercise, and also to take their input when you get it, but also to think more deeply about what you want your project to be and how to make it something that's truly ethical. To use that word.
Thanks so much. We're going to take one more question from the audience before we wrap up. These are really fruitful questions and great discussion from folks. This last one lands on a question about knowledge mobilization that I think that many of you will have really great insights about. It's a question in two parts, directed first to Tom and Claire, and other folks can jump in later if they'd like. This person's really curious about the different audiences for your research, Tom. In addition to communications for the city's legal department, what other kinds of knowledge products or experiences are being generated?
Well, our most fundamental way of communicating with the population in SROs, apart from usual brochures and so on, we have a haiku project. And that was an effort to add some artistic dimension to how we communicated. Right to remain #1 use photographs, which of course are very, very common, perhaps too common in this day and age. Haiku is a very clever idea. It's a simple Japanese Canadian poetic structure. Most of us have been exposed to it in grade school. It's the first kind of poetry we see. It's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. And that simplicity makes it extremely accessible to everybody. And yet it can be very, very powerful because it's very heightened and condensed words. And we've had, well, it's an ongoing process, ongoing project, but that's gone over very well in my opinion. We tend to write or compose to the various levels in different ways. I mentioned Nick's very, very high level document to the legal department of the city. Now that's not appropriate to the population in SROs at all, right? So you have to be very sensitive to who you're talking to of the various groups. We also communicate with other activist type groups. So that's a different kind of basket of language that we have to be familiar with, and we have to utilize effectively, or we wish to utilize effectively. Video project like this one, for example. And we've got a number of ongoing video projects, and that goes into the whole social media world. That's just like throwing a pebble in a pond. We'll see what the ripples go, right? So yeah, all different ways. And again, we put some thought into what we're saying, but how we're saying it. So what you do is how you do it. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer.
Yeah. Well, not just the what, but the how is a huge, huge question. And this last question kind of gets to that heart of the how. It's to Claire and also, Marina and Nick and Connie are welcome to jump in as well. But I'll have Claire answer first. How, thinking about the point that you made about the university knowledge production model, how do we invest in other systems and structures that prioritize sharing knowledge more equitably?
I love that question. Sorry, was someone else trying to jump in?
I think that we can begin with Claire because that was a question directed to you. So,
well, I think maybe I like that it's a place to begin because that's where I know to start as well. I I did another community engaged research project when I was in my undergrad, and part of that project was making sure to present it in many different ways so that the folks at that organization could then take it and do different things with it. So I think that's one way to help with knowledge mobilization. Also just to not lend your labor to only the questions that you're interested in for your own research. First breaking that down of like how you think of your questions, but also if there's another thing that the community that you're working with is interested in looking into, then spending time on that as well. I think that is something useful for knowledge mobilization as well.
Wonderful. Any last thoughts about that before we wrap up? Nick?
I think it's a very important question. And it's one that we can and are contesting those traditional formats in, I think, some interesting ways. But I think it's also sometimes useful to recognize that those traditional formats can be strategically useful. So writing the academic paper, the peer-reviewed academic paper, with all the sort of capital that comes with it, can be powerful if, of course, it comes from a good place and comes from that community engaged research, because it can then be used in mobilizing, used in activism as a means by which a set of political claims can be articulated. So it can be useful, but there are interesting formats. So in DWS, we're experimenting with co-writing an academic paper that will be presented at an international conference based on the lived experiences of DWS members. So we'll see how that goes. I'm really excited about that. It's going to be interesting, but it's going to be a conventional package, but the content and the way in which that content is produced, I think, is going to be quite different. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you so much, everybody. This has been such a fruitful discussion and really leaves me with a lot to think about, and I hope the audience as well. As we close out today, I know that there's so much more to talk about, and I wonder if we can close with 3 words that everybody could share that articulate where you're sitting right now. Not quite a haiku, Tom, but 3 words that describe where we are with this right now. Perhaps we could start with Tom and Marina, moving to Connie, then Claire, then Nick.
Let's move ahead. I feel we're getting some traction in what we're doing. That's what I feel right now, right across the board.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I don't know is a pretty good one. There's just like, this is a process, right? It's a process, and it's an unfinished process and a continuing unfinished process. And so it's in this conversation you mentioned, there's a lot more for us that we can talk about, but we have to be comfortable in it being unfinished and ongoing. And that's how community engaged research is too. Just a lot of unknowns.
The 3 words that come to my mind, process was definitely one of them. Gratitude and consistency. Those are things. They're important things in my life right now. Being involved in this.
My words are relationships, like formation. Things are always in formation, and then this is 2. But I'm thinking about representation, tokenization, the tensions there.
I'm a professor, so I don't have 3 words. I have like a 50-minute presentation with PowerPoint slides and footnotes, which isn't going to help you. But I think if I'm reflecting on how this relationship should work best, the word that comes to mind is respect. So respect, respect, respect.
I think for me, I'm thinking so much about trust, reciprocity, and the process. And then I really thank all of you for your reflections there. Thank you to everybody here too for joining us in this discussion, particularly after a holiday in the middle of the week. It's not easy to kind of get the whole machine back going in mornings like this. So thank you so much for your time. We're really looking forward to convening more discussions like this with CERi. We have a webinar series that's starting in the new year with a preview in November with more such questions. Looking forward to meeting some of you and hearing from you and having you join us again another time. But at this moment, we'll say goodbye and we hope that you have a lovely day. Take good care, everybody.